I'm curious to hear what you guys think of India specifically because there are reports of elite Mumbai businessmen saying, "Oh yeah, well, all these foreign investors that they have for throughout the '90s and 2000s didn't want are now being invited in, and they call them, or it's been reported that some of them call them like modern colonizers, the new East India Company." So how does culture kind of play into your thought process? Because there are some that want you, and some that might want you a little less.
I mean, Anthony, you want to take that first?
Go, go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say it is a thing, right? I think most people who are maybe Anglo-European don't really understand cultural historical context when it comes to being from a country that perhaps is a previous colony, and that stuff matters. It's not like people just forget, and it wasn't 1,000 years ago; it was like 100 years ago. So that's definitely a conversation there. But I also think now, as time goes on, you have this level of pride in the opportunity that exists in a place like India. Like I interviewed someone recently, and they were talking about how now more than like ever, more than 20 years ago for sure, this woman's friends who lived in Mumbai, who lived in Delhi, they felt much more confident about the need and the opportunity that they have in a place like India versus 10, 20 years ago. And if you're an investor, I feel like there's definitely a level of nuance that you need to have to understand that you're not just coming in to colonize. But I think at the end of the day, people are commercially savvy and they understand the help that foreign investors can provide, especially right now. And if it's on their terms, it's probably better terms now than ever before. I mean, you just look at Reliance Geo, who just raised billions and billions of dollars from some of the world's biggest Western investors. And that's on probably much better terms for the Indian party in this transaction than at any other time in the last like 20 years. So it's definitely something to consider. But that narrative, I think, is moving on to a different narrative. The narrative now is that as a modern Indian, just as an example that applies to a lot of emerging markets, you have more leverage now and you have more confidence in the ability to get fair deals when it comes to investment. There's this sort of maybe arbitrage that could have happened 5, 10 years ago. If you were like an early emerging markets investor 5, 10, 20 years ago, you could probably have more harsh terms as the investor. You could probably get away with treating your partner not as nicely. But now there's this shift when it comes to leverage that emerging markets have. And India is one very strong example of that because it's so big, it's done so well. It probably is one of the models for what an emerging market could be compared to many others. That I think that narrative is shifting, but it's something that isn't going to happen overnight. And there's an awareness that needs to be that needs to exist, particularly for a Western investor, of the historical context.
So I totally agree with Anthony. Like pretty much 100%. The only thing I'll add to that is FOMO, right? You're always going to have local investors that are very wealthy from really wealthy families that have missed out because they're jealous that they didn't get what the foreign investor got, right? At the early valuation. And that's always going to be a factor in any market. So and that drives a lot of investments. FOMO drives a lot of investments globally, right? So that's the only other thing I'd add to what Anthony said, because it's if you talk about India is well on its way. Just the very fact that you have foreign capital coming in, not just directly into companies at very high valuations, but the fact that you have this thriving ecosystem that can tap into both local funding today, foreign funding, but also the mix of the two, right? That means India is well on its way. There's growth aplenty as you look at India in the future, and a lot of innovation is going to come out of it. The economy is going to improve. It's going to really benefit everybody, especially if you're a young entrepreneur. But it's the rest of the region now that really needs to start benefiting from some of that capital, right? Because you have equally talented people in Bangladesh, Pakistan, in Egypt, in Turkey, right? Out here in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Lebanon has some great talent. Jordan has some great talent. Smaller markets, but talent is there, right? And talent is universal. And when you build a real solution that's innovative, let's not forget, at the end of the day, the way how globalized the world is today, we've got Arabic, Hindi, Urdu speakers living all across the world. You've got little Indias and little Pakistans everywhere, right? In the US, in the UK, you have different cities that cater to this. And therefore, even if you're building a niche product for your own community, it could be global. And people just don't realize that because we have such large populations all over the world, right? And even if you're not targeting that niche, you could be a great founder with great technical skills and target the global markets.